150 years old. On the 4th of July 1837, the first train of the new Grand Junction Railway ran through here. We are celebrating it now as they celebrated it then, with their song. No, not that one, this one.
On the 4th day of July I recollect well what bustle there was in the morning I'll tell, with the lads and young lassies so buxom and gay, delighted and talking about the railway. Travel by steam, so the folks say, all the world over upon the railway.
Crewe has always been a railway town, not just a railway junction and a railway station, but a railway works and a railway settlement. Crewe was created by the railways, and it is that creation which this new heritage centre extols, starting with this weekend party. But the centre has another purpose. The celebration of past achievements is good for self-esteem, but that self-esteem is the inspiration for future achievements. And so Crewe is telling the world we had a remarkable past and we intend to have a remarkable future. So in this programme, we want to tell you the story of Crewe, past, present and future. And we'll begin at the beginning with David Jenkins.
You may find this rather hard to believe, but if you've been standing here in the year 1830, you'd have been surrounded by green fields and open countryside. But way up to the north, stirring events were happening in Lancashire, which was to change the face of this rustic part of rural Cheshire. Now in 1830, they opened the world's first intercity main line between Liverpool and Manchester, and it went pretty well straight between the two. Down in the south, another new railway was soon promoted between London and Birmingham, and it was going to end up down here. The object of the Grand Junction Railway was to link this line with the midpoint of the Liverpool and Manchester, and they set off pretty well as straight as an arrow, ignoring nearly every town on the way, apart from perhaps Stafford, the only big place of any size. About halfway along, the Nantwich to Manchester Road crossed this railway line, this new railway line, more or less at the midpoint. It still does, by the way, and they built a station there, and they called it Crewe, named after Crewe Hall, just a mile or so down the road. The first train actually called here on the 4th of July, 1837. And he might have stayed like that because Crewe isn't a particularly natural focus of routes. But within a very few years, other lines had joined on to the original Grand Junction. The first one came in from the Chester direction, on my left over there. And a couple of years later, they brought one in from Manchester too. That was a bit of a mistake because the Manchester folks would have rather gone via the Potteries, but that was thrown out by Parliament. So they came down the line just over there. So within 5 years of opening, Crewe had already become a junction on this new trunk system. It wasn't much longer before two more lines, one from the Potteries and one from Shrewsbury, came in from the south end of Crewe. And this formed a radiating pattern of routes which has remained ever since. Now, while all this was going on, the Grand Junction Railway had settled down happily to running its trains, and it had come into an agreement with the Liverpool and Manchester to have its works at Edge Hill near Liverpool. Bit of a strange choice, really, because it was way out at one end of the line. There wasn't much space in the works, and moreover there was trouble with broken crank axles and goodness knows what else. And they finally decided they needed somewhere else to put their works. And they settled on this place, in the angle between the Chester line and the Liverpool line away to the north. And they set up a new works right where the new Heritage Centre is. And it turned out to be a very good place to put it, because it was right in the middle of the Grand Junction system, approximately halfway between Birmingham and Lancashire. And a few years later, in 1846, when the whole lot was amalgamated to form a very large new railway, they called it the London and North Western Railway, and this giant stretched all the way from London to Carlisle, lo and behold, the midpoint was still Crewe. And when the Chester line went out to Holyhead, and the Manchester line over there eventually went on and beyond to Leeds, Crewe still remained in the centre. The growth of railways in the middle of the 19th century was really quite phenomenal, and Crewe shared that growth. Within 20 years, it was far too small for the traffic that was coming through it, and these big new train sheds were erected as early as the 1860s. And it didn't just end there. Crewe was never renowned for its great architectural merits, but there were some rather nice buildings on the platforms themselves, and these bay windows, for example, are really rather good. And that's not all you can see. The cleaned up brickwork is well worth having a look at. There are some of the original drinking fountains, including one for the dogs to take a little bit of refreshment as well as their human masters. The roof over many of the platforms is still the original one that goes back to the 19th century. And outside the station is the Crewe Arms Hotel, which dates as long ago as 1837. That was acquired by the London and North Western Railway on lease in 1864. It had been built by a private entrepreneur, and it remained in railway ownership as long as 1959. And so it was that well before the end of Queen Victoria's reign, probably as early as the 1860s and 1870s, Crewe and its station had become an absolutely vital part of the British railway network. And that vital role it has never lost to the present day.
In recent years, there has been nothing but change at Crewe. First, the main line from London to Liverpool and Manchester was electrified, and the steam trains disappeared. And then the junction, which had grown and grown, was torn up 2 years ago and relaid to a more rational pattern. And today, many an intercity express does not even condescend to stop at Crewe. They rush through at 80 miles an hour, a passage which the first railway community here would have regarded as discourteous. But then, as Tony Burton will explain, that first railway community was more interested in rolling stock than in railway journeys.
You may be surprised to hear that Crewe station wasn't officially in Crewe until the 1930s. Well, there's a simple explanation. You see, the town didn't grow up with the station. It developed when the company moved their engineering works here from Edge Hill. Now, engineering works need people, and people need homes. And in the early 1840s, this area was just green fields and a few scattered farmsteads. So the company bought up the land and employed Mr. John Cunningham as architect to set the new town of Crewe on its way. And these few streets are just about all that's left of the first batch of some 200 houses. These were labourers' cottages with just 4 rooms, basic, plain, perfectly decent little houses. But that meant a lot in those days. When 200 workmen and their families arrived here in one weekend from Liverpool in 1843, they must have been thrilled to bits with what they found. You have to remember that in the major industrial cities, people were often living in appalling slums or jerry-built back-to-back terraces. Here, they had a little garden at the back, running water, sewers, and the company gasworks provided gas at the rate of 2p per burner per week. It must have seemed pure, unadulterated luxury at a rent of 2 shillings a week. Mind you, anybody whose house was deemed to be in a filthy and disreputable condition didn't just lose their homes, they lost their jobs as well. And that's one reason why it was Crewe's proud boast that there were never any slums in the town. Those were labourers' cottages, but everyone had to be housed in the new town. At the top of the scale, there were grand villas for the works superintendents, and each group in the works had a house that was intended to fit their status. These houses, bigger, grander than the cottages, were occupied by the foreman. The street is officially known as Victoria Street, but inevitably the people of Crewe christened it Gaffer's Row. The company had to provide everything that the new town required, and the spiritual welfare of the community was high on the list of priorities. The company and officialdom were very firmly Church of England, so a new church had to be built. And until it was ready, services were actually held in the works themselves. The company built the church, and the company paid for the church, but it wasn't exactly a case of no expense spared. It all looks very fine seen from a distance, but close to, things look a little different. The walls aren't stone at all. They're brick, with stone filling in the important details, and when you get round this side, half the church has gone, demolished a few years ago. That part's still in use. And it's still got a railway connection as a memorial window to John Ramsbottom, the great engineer. But the Grand Junction Company Church is not what it was, nor is everything what it seems. Fine, elegant stone pillar, you might think. Cast iron, made in the company works and painted to look like stone. The company did recognise that not everybody was C of E, so they provided cash help for other churches. There was a Catholic church, but the really strong faction were the nonconformists. Everything from Calvinistic Methodists to particular Baptists. 17 chapels in all. There was no shortage of houses for the faithful, and just one house for the unfaithful, a flourishing brothel over there in Cross Street. If you wanted to choose one place and say, this is the social heart of the old railway town, this would be the place. And it's still an important centre. There's the new public library and the municipal buildings over there, constructed in 1905, quite modern really, but still celebrating the railway connection. The Stephenson's famous locomotive, the Rocket, up there on the weather vane. And the young lady on the facade is holding really very accurate representation of locomotive number 933 Charles Dickens, built, need one say, in Crewe. But up till quite recently, by far the most important place was situated right here on this patch, the Mechanics Institute. Now that may not sound very exciting, but many of the men who came to Crewe were illiterate, and it was here that they learnt their ABC, while others came to improve their knowledge of technical drawing or mechanical engineering. But there was more to the place than that. It was a great social centre as well. The Working Men's Club, as grandiose in its architecture as any aristocrat's club in central London. And it began under very impressive auspices. The founding father was Francis Trevithick, son of the railway pioneer. The company built it, but when they tried to ban radical papers from the reading room, the men soon showed that they regarded it as their institute. It was an early example of opposition to the company's attempt to dominate every single aspect of life in the town. But there were happier aspects to company rule as well. 1887, Queen Victoria's Jubilee and 50 years of railway history coincided. Not an event to ignore. The company made the grand gesture. They gave the town a park. The man who designed it was not only the most famous chief engineer at the works, but mayor of Crewe as well, Francis Webb. And you could scour the whole of Britain and not find a more colourful, more beautiful park than this. It's a lovely place to walk on the grass or go down to the lake and feed the ducks. But even here you can't get away from the railways. Here it is, in flowers, a portrait of Lion, the oldest working steam engine in the world, which is absolutely fine, except for one thing. It's not a Crewe engine. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of interest in this corner of town. Look over the bridge and what do you see? Nothing at all. But there were tracks down there once, and this bit of crumbling wall is all that remains of the Works General Office. There was a time when it seemed the whole town was run from here. Certainly the management tried to run everything, and there was a furious row in the 1880s when the management tried to use their power to force the men to vote Conservative in the local election. It even made headlines in such august bodies as the Times. But they'd gone too far. They had to back down, and never again did they try to interfere directly in the politics of Crewe. Here in the railway office, they stayed with railway affairs and left the town to the townspeople. But at least they could say they'd given Crewe a town to be proud of.
So the new Heritage Centre is on the site of the old railway works. Now the centre has been designed to entertain the whole family and tell them all about Crewe. It has its own railway. It has Lion, the real one, the oldest working locomotive in the world, built in 1838 for the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. And in fact, the cavalcade of steam locomotives was the highlight of this weekend, but I'll show you that in a minute. Now, for the best view of the track, you go to the north signal box here at Crewe, which is now also part of the Heritage Centre. I think Tony Burton would like to live there.
Oh, with me now is Ernie Johnson. Ernie, this must be all very familiar territory to you.
Oh, yes, it is. quite familiar, worked here for many years.
And so what are you doing now?
Well, we've simulated the signal box as it was, with the layout as it was before the reorganisation, and we've simulated all the workings inside the box without working any outside apparatus.
But you can show us what would happen when a train came in. Now, we've got one, say, up here.
Certainly. Yes, I've got a train. Should we demonstrate a train coming in from Chester? And we want to take him into platform 2A. In that case, you'll see the train come along on the track, and I will set the route for the train. And I've now set the points, the black ones are the points. I clear the signal comes off. I've got another signal to clear, and then I finally come to the main aspect, which is 121, and you'll observe that the main aspect has changed from red to green for the driver. All that would be outside. We've simulated this inside.
Oh, I see. So the green light over there is what you'd actually see out on the track.
What the driver would
and the
see.
two white lights are also what
The driver would see, yes.
I see, but you just bring it in here for
And
demonstration.
these indications here indicate that the signal has gone to the off position, so the signalman knows that the signal has gone to the off position. It's changed from red to white light.
So now what we have, we've got everything clear, and he can no longer wait at his signal, he can go straight into the platform.
He proceeds now along the track, and you'll observe that the track circuits will show the train movements as it goes along, and it also locks all the points on its way in.
So it's completely safe?
Completely.
Now, I remember the old days when the signal used to haul on great big levers to work the mechanical semaphore signals. Of course, these are electric signals, obviously much more efficient and not such hard work, but what are the other advantages?
Well, the difference is that it was a modern technique in about 1939, and obviously there's 214 levers here, and you can imagine that if there were big levers with 4.5-inch spaces, and this is much more compact and much more efficient.
So when you pull this lever, what is it actually doing?
It actuates a number of circuit controllers underneath, which
I see.
act as switches.
So it's like a light switch at home, if I can be very simple about it.
Well, that is being very simple, yes. Yes, but it is right, yes.
But it's obviously a lot more complicated.
Instead of bringing a light in, it brings a relay. Operates a relay, or...
I see. So it must actually be
a function.
It must actually be a very complicated system you've got behind all this.
Yes, I would say that's safe to say it is a very complicated system.
What sort of condition was it in before you became part of the museum?
Well, it had been left for 2 years, and it was not in a very good condition. We had to renew wiring and relays and reorganise the routes.
Who did all the work?
My colleague, George Williams, and myself.
And are you pleased with the results now?
We're very satisfied with them, yes, we are.
I think
we've achieved quite a lot in the time that was given to us, allowed to us.
Well, I'm sure the visitors are going to get enormous pleasure out of it, and I certainly enjoyed watching it. Thanks very much.
That's very nice, thank you. Thank you.
Now that the old signal box is part of the new Heritage Centre, it has been replaced by a new signalling centre. There are no levers to pull, only buttons to push. That's progress. Now, for railwaymen the world over, Crewe means not the junction or the station, but the works. The works, as I said, is the reason for the town, but the works is also the reason for local pride, as David Jenkinson will explain.
This may seem a rather strange locomotive to stand representative for all the mighty machines that came out of Crewe Works, but it's got a story to tell. Look at the date on its nameplate. Crewe Works, 1865. And it was built because a year earlier, the works had grown so large and had to expand down the Chester line to such an extent that they needed their own small miniature railway to operate even within the factory itself. Now, why did it grow so big? The first works was jammed between the Warrington line and the Chester line. Within 5 years, they had to fill up the gap between the Warrington line and the Manchester line. A few years later, the houses had come so close to the original site that they couldn't expand in that direction. There was no choice within 20 years. Green fields yet again. So down the Chester line they went in 1864. By now they'd decided to make their own steel as well, and they'd set up a Bessemer steel plant. But it still wasn't good enough, because to get down to the Chester line they had to use the main line to Chester, and it was getting so crowded with traffic that they even built a deviation line round the original main line. And all this within the first 20 or 30 years after setting up this tremendous factory. And now I'd like you to meet Francis William Webb, perhaps the most towering genius ever to preside over Crewe works. He was here from 1871 till 1903, during which time new engines came out of this factory approximately once every 3 or 4 working days. And on one famous occasion in 1878, they did the whole lot in 25.5 hours. So famous was Crewe that in 1913 the Railway magazine claimed it to be the most famous locomotive works in the world. But then things were changing. The First World War came upon us and the railways were amalgamated yet again. And in 1923 the old London and North Western Railway became a part of the even larger London, Midland and Scottish system. The early days of the LMS were chaotic, to put it mildly, and it wasn't helped by the fact that Crewe Works itself was reorganising its method of production. But in 1932, the real successor to Webb came on the scene. His name was William Arthur Stanier, and he came, of all places, from the Great Western Railway. Now, in the popular mind, he was most famous for his blue streamlined locomotives, the Coronation class that ran the new expresses to Scotland. But in fact, he was most important for the complete range of standard locomotives that he built for the LMS Railway. And he couldn't have done it without the manufacturing capability of Crewe Works. And this is Crewe Works in 1935, a year when they built no fewer than 10 Princess-class Pacifics, or 462s, for the Anglo-Scottish services. The boiler and firebox unit, having been put together elsewhere, is brought to the next stage of assembly, the main locomotive frames, onto which it's lowered from huge overhead cranes. The work was very labour-intensive, and the general idea was to move work to the workforce rather than have the workforce moving to the constructional phase. So at each stage of the activity, the whole unit was moved along the belt, as they called it, to the next stage. Now, meantime, the wheels were being finished off by being given their tyres. This was a process of heating the tyre until the wheel could be lowered inside the tyre, and then the tyre was shrunk onto the wheel. When both sides had been done, the whole assembly was then hoisted overhead again to be taken down the belt to the next stage of assembly. This is the driving axle with 2 huge cranks on it, but there'd be 2 more without these cranks, very carefully positioned so that the whole boiler, firebox and cab unit could be brought and very, very carefully lowered onto the wheels. You couldn't do it like a motor car by simply taking an odd wheel off by a jack at the side of the machine. You had to do the whole thing in a very careful way. There's a great deal of precision about it too. These were huge, great pieces of metal, but they fitted them with very small tolerances indeed. And the same was true in the forge. This is a white-hot billet of steel about to be made into a connecting rod using a drop forge. And this involved teamwork of a very high order. The men working together as a complete unit, turning and twisting the white-hot metal, and eventually putting it under specially shaped hammers so that the big end of the connecting rod could be reduced to its correct shape, so that at the finishing stage it could be put into the finishing shop and machined so as to be a final and accurate fit on the locomotive. And this fit was again man-handled. And the weight of these components was really quite something. But nevertheless, everything had to fit with a great deal of precision. Stanier was a great workshopsman and insisted on very high-quality workmanship. Meantime, elsewhere, the tender had been made in another part of the factory, and the final uniting of locomotive to tender and the steam test could take place before Princess Arthur of Connaught could go and join its colleagues on the main line.
Now that was what they used to build at the Crewe Works, but what do they build now? Well, with me is Norman Hunter of British Rail Engineering Limited, BREL. What are they up to in the works these days?
doing what we've always done, building locomotives and building them better with more high tech. We're designing locomotives now which use computer-aided design, and we design these at factories. We now can come up with a much more exciting product, both in design and in shape and in operation.
And are they uniquely Crewe locomotives, or can anyone build them now?
Well, we'd like to think they're just Crewe, because we design for our own railway system here, and we're designing for operations around the world. We're hopeful that these vehicles will sell around the world.
And what are your main products then?
Well, the Class 91, which is the Electra program, we're building that with GEC. The Class 87-2 is our own vehicle, and we are the main contractor for that vehicle. It's a mixed passenger locomotive. It can run at high speed for passenger service and for freight.
And will that one go through Crewe?
Yes, indeed, on the main line. It's for all round Britain, in fact. We would think that British Rail would primarily want to use it maybe in the West Coast main line.
There appears to be some confusion in the public mind about British Rail and British Rail Engineering, BREL. Are you still part of British Rail?
We are still a wholly owned subsidiary of British Railways Board, but we run our own operation now. We're at arm's length relationship with the railways. We run 4 key operational centres in the UK, and Crewe is one of those.
But you don't get all the work for British Rail necessarily.
Indeed not. We have to compete with the private sector for work for British Rail. We're glad to say that over the last 2 years, since they've adopted this policy of competitive tendering, that we've in fact won nearly 60 to 70% of their work.
But that means that you're looking for work from other people too.
Yes, indeed. Overseas markets are growing, and we are certainly looking to increase our share of overseas markets in locomotives, but primarily in passenger coaches. And I think that the majority of what that we now have got to concentrate on for the UK market is high-speed locomotives, as we're doing at Crewe, passenger coaches for UK, and passenger coaches and bogies for overseas.
So you're providers of rolling stock to the world, but is there anything else that you can do in the works if you're short of orders?
Indeed, we've been looking at a policy throughout our works of general engineering. The works are tremendous experience in doing general engineering work, and we can repair engines and gearboxes, we can rewind electric motors. There's a whole new technology moving into the works to maximise the output.
But do you see the works as being central to the future of Crewe as it always was?
Oh, I think so. BREL, I think, in Crewe is one of the most important things for the area. There's a tremendous number of people from our works live in Crewe, and I think it's central, and it's the key, one of the key operations in this area.
So the trick is to produce something that nobody else is producing, that you can sell worldwide.
That's right. Well, we'd like to think the new Class 91 and 87-2 locomotives are just that. We're building these vehicles like we think no one else is building them around the world. Modular, with high tech, with benefits to the customer, and that's really what matters. If we can build vehicles that are of benefit to the customer and don't just look nice, then we'll sell them.
Norman, thank you very much. Well, now they're having an open day at the works this weekend, so they couldn't keep Tony Burton out.
If someone announces it's open day at the local factory, you might expect a few people to turn up. But when it's open day at Crewe Works, they come in their thousands. Enthusiasts all, cameras at the ready. For some, the great attraction is the steam engines, from the Victorian splendours of Cornwall to the giants from the end of the steam age. But a new generation go into ecstasies and sigh nostalgically over the preserved Deltic or the Class 2 diesel. And even the modern engines in for repair draw a crowd. With me is John Evans, the training officer of British Rail Engineering and the man responsible for organising Open Day. John, what do the visitors see when they get here?
They can see the works, that's the workshops themselves, the facilities we have, and the locomotives that are in here for repair. They can also see the new build which we're undertaking at the present time. In addition to that, they can see the visiting locomotives that have come, some steam locomotives and diesels, and a variety of attractions.
I suppose the locomotives have to be the star attractions. How do you choose what you want here?
Well, this year, because we're having the Heritage Festival in conjunction with the town, we have tried to get 100 years or so of locomotives that have been built at Crewe, and we have them from the main eras of the railways.
What does your company get out of opening up like this? I mean, it's a tremendous amount of organisation.
Well, one of the objectives of having an open day is to raise money for charity, and if we can raise a lot of money for charity, then you know, we think we've been successful, and to provide a happy, interesting day for the visitors that come.
The organisation of the event belongs with British Rail Engineering, but most of the preserved engines are here thanks to the dedicated work of enthusiastic owners. Clive Maugenier is secretary of the society that owns Princess Elizabeth.
Well, around 1961, the engine was eventually saved from the scrapyard by Roger Bell. Money was collected to pay BR £2,100 odd, and from then on the society decided that they would like to try and get the locomotive back into working order. Over a long period of years, and it wasn't until 1976 which she reappeared on the main line and was passed for hauling passenger trains. From then on the hard work began. Obviously the engine had to be retubed, but the members in actual fact give their time and money to do this, so that most of their spare time is taken in keeping the locomotive running. For instance, last weekend we had a trip for a charity organisation which was only a short run as far as the engine goes from Shrewsbury to Chester, but that's the sort of thing which the engine does over the period of working life up until we are now past, obviously, until 1993, so that she will be working on revenue earning trips of that kind.
And this is all done by private individuals who've got other jobs as well?
That's right, yes. Everybody has obviously their normal day-to-day jobs, and their spare time is spent maintaining the locomotive and also, of course, the financing of it. Now, this is one of the biggest things because we are not financed by any large company. The members have to fund the engine and run it as well. And that is done mainly by sales events which we travel to all over the country, generating money from those sales events to keep the locomotive running, so that all that money is used just to keep coal in the tender and obviously all the repairs which need to be done.
Well, it's a splendid locomotive. There must be something very special about it to you and to others.
Yeah, there's two things actually. First of all, she was named after our present Queen when she was a young girl. Obviously that is the name Princess Elizabeth, but the second thing is, one of the major items is the fact that she broke the non-stop world record between Euston and Glasgow Euston on 2 successive days in 1936. That was the 16th and 17th of November.
Well, she's a splendid engine. I do hope she keeps steaming for many, many years to come.
Thank you very much, Tony.
With me now is a man who remembers Princess Elizabeth when she was a working girl, Councillor John Bedson, because you're a railway man yourself.
Yes, well, until 5 years ago. I retired 5 years ago, but I worked all my working life was spent on the railway.
And did you come from a railway family?
Yes, my father was a railwayman. He was in Crewe Works. He worked in Crewe Works. My grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather walked from Ruddymowen in North Wales when the Grand Junction Railway opened.
Now, why has it taken so long to have this heritage centre? You should have had it 30 years ago.
Quite true, we should have had it. What you really need, of course, is just the incentive, just the spur to make people do these things. And the 150th anniversary of the town and the Grand Junction Railway was too good an opportunity to let go by.
The Victorians, of course, did it for the 50th, didn't they?
Oh, they had a splendid celebration in 1887, and fortunately they documented everything they did on that day, even to the weather and the menus and the way all the houses in the town were decorated and so on. And in a way that served as a guide and an inspiration to us for what we're doing today. We were determined to do as well as the Victorians.
But this is more than just a party. You intend to keep this thing going?
Oh yes, yes, this is going to be a permanent part of our heritage.
Because I came past about 3 weeks ago and there was nothing here.
No, the whole thing has been done very quickly. We only decided, the council took a decision on December the 19th last year that we would have this celebration. And since then, everything has been, well, everybody's worked so very hard. It was simply a piece of waste ground. It is the site of the original railway works, of course, but it had been disused for years and years. And it was a tremendous task to get it in the state that it is now.
But it's meant to be something more than a museum.
Oh, indeed, yes. It's meant, first of all, to be something that demonstrates that Crewe is a go-ahead sort of place. We're not just wallowing in nostalgia. This is going to spur us, I hope, to go on with the next 150 years. I think that one of the themes, when you read about what they did in 1887, of course, was the optimism that they had there. They were quite determined. They were quite sure that next year the railways would be better than this year and Crewe would be better than this year. Perhaps we're less optimistic nowadays, but nevertheless we feel that we have something to offer in Crewe.
And not just in the railway business.
No, oh no, indeed. We have to recognise now that although Crewe is still a railway town and still a lot to offer to railways, we have to diversify, and this really is what we're trying to do and what we're succeeding in doing.
So should we keep an eye on the business park as the place where Crewe will expand?
The Crewe Business Park is a very important, even more important to the future of Crewe than this exhibition centre. The two things are not unconnected. We feel if we can demonstrate that we can put on something like this in 5 months, then surely we can demonstrate to business people that we can do a similar sort of thing in our business park.
But you expect this to be a going concern?
It will be a going concern, I have no doubt about that. I think that people, not only locally but nationally, are interested in the history of railways, and I think that this is a unique exhibition. We're not really in competition with York Museum and places like that. This is actually a living part of history. We've got around us the historical part of the railways going back for 150 years, and at the same time we've got the very latest in railway technology actually on the site, and trains going by within a few yards of where we've got 150-year-old exhibits. That's something that's quite unique, I think.
But it is not today's trains which have drawn the people on this first weekend at the Crewe Heritage Centre. It is the ancient locomotives, the steam trains. Appropriately, Princess Elizabeth led the way, and to provide a running commentary as seen from the footplate, we invited the chairman of the Owners Society, Ken Andrews, to tell us all.
We're now on the main Chester to Crewe line, and the engine itself is in reverse, and we're just approaching now. We now have a crowd on the bridge, waving. The engine's still in reverse. We're approaching the Heritage Centre. We're now opposite the Heritage Centre. You can see the marquees. The brake is now on, and the driver is now altering the gear from reverse to forward. It's now in forward gear, and the reverser is locked. The brake is off.
Don't move yet, Arch.
And now the driver now is about to move forward.
Rolling us forward now, Arch.
He's now opening the regulator. And closing it again. His hand is steady on the brake. We're now about to enter the Heritage Centre. Crowd lining the fence. The driver's opening the regulator again. We're just coming in past the mound inside the Heritage Centre. You can see people waiting for our arrival. Waving, I hope. Give us a wave. You're on television.
Princess Elizabeth taking her rightful place in the Heritage Centre. Well, now, David Jenkins and I had the best possible view of the cavalcade, so I simply picked his brains. Do you think she's going to get in everybody's way, though, being there?
Well, it's a very tight site, as it were. There are very few sidings and they're not very long, so there's a great deal of toing and froing got to take place to get everything in the right position.
Because when the Queen comes, they're going to give her a model of Princess Elizabeth, aren't they?
So I believe, yes.
Well, now, once we get her settled and moved, we can start bringing the others in. How many have we got altogether?
I think there are about another 6 or 7 due to come down. The first lot there'll be 4 in the first group, and I think 2 more, plus the ones that are on site already, so there'll be about 8 or 9 there at the end of the day.
Well, now, here they come, led by...
number D200. This is a diesel-electric mainline locomotive built in 1959 as part of the new modernisation scheme. British Rail have entered into the spirit of it by painting it in its olden colours, its old colours.
It still belongs to them, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. And here's Duke of Gloucester, a very large express passenger locomotive, then a diesel hydraulic, Western Prince, and finally a class 24 diesel electric, and all 4 of them built at Crewe at different times in the British Railways period.
And 3 of the 4 now looked after by enthusiasts?
Yes, indeed.
Because are enthusiasts as keen on diesels as they are on the older ones?
Oh yes, the diesel enthusiasts are every bit as enthusiastic, as it were, as their steam colleagues. There's a certain amount of rivalry between them, though.
But it must be much harder, must it, to find bits for the old ones, the real old steam locomotives, and indeed manuals on how to maintain them than it is of the newer ones.
Well, Duke of Gloucester itself is a remarkable example of that. But the diesels are probably slightly easier to cope with, because, in a sense, that the memory isn't quite so far away. Some of these are still active on the railway, and some only were withdrawn a few years ago.
Why aren't the other 3 under their own steam?
Because there are very strict regulations as to the operation of private locomotives on British Railways. Privately owned diesels are not permitted to run under their own power on the BR lines at all, and steam locomotives have to undergo some very severe examinations.
She's a lovely locomotive, that Duke of Gloucester, isn't she?
Oh, yes.
Wasn't she almost the last one they built here?
The very last express type to be built at Crewe, yes.
I mean, if we hadn't gone diesel, would we still have them?
Well, I don't know whether we'd still have these, but certainly Duke of Gloucester might well have been the prototype, but in fact it was the D200 type that took over only a few years after Duke of Gloucester was made.
And at least Crewe got the job of building it,
yes.
So they were happy. Here she comes again. All by herself this time.
Yes, and now this is Duke of Gloucester with the going back into its birth. This was an amazing restoration by the people in Loughborough, an entirely privately sponsored affair. It was really nothing much more than a heap of bits and pieces. Half the components had to be fabricated again, and this was a one-off locomotive that might have led the way later.
Who's that?
That's Tony Mosley, who's very much involved with the railway movements on this heritage centre.
Well, he's the superintendent now, isn't he?
That's right, yes.
You can't go anywhere without his permission.
No.
Not if you're a locomotive.
He's going to have to undo that a little bit more.
Needs a bigger breakfast, I think.
This is quite a tricky job, actually. Very much part of the older railway methods, the screw coupling.
We used to see that always, didn't we?
Yes, indeed. There's still quite a lot of it about, and it can still be quite dangerous if you're not very careful.
There we are. The red dragon goes off.
They'd actually be moved around on the site.
Who's making all that smoke?
Yeah, there it is. It's called Whiston. It's a little austerity locomotive, again designed by a Crewe man, a chap called Riddles. And talking of Crewe, here's perhaps the most famous locomotive on show today, Cornwall.
That's a little one at the front.
Yes, that's the little one at the front. We've lent it to Crewe from the museum at York, and it's going to stay here all summer.
That's very generous of you. Are you not feared that all your visitors who would have come to York will now come to Crewe instead?
Well, we hope we'll go to both. But Cornwall is what is known as the Crewe type of locomotive. This particular configuration of the rather distinctive curves at the front and the single driving wheel and the frames holding the motion together. This was very much a product of Crewe in the 1840s and 1850s. Cornwall was built in 1847 and converted to this form about 10 years later.
But where did you find it?
Well, it went on working at Crewe until well into the present century. Used on sort of engineers and special saloons. It didn't do much hard work in the 20th century.
Now, is the big one interesting as well?
Yes, indeed.
They think it is.
Yes, well, this is another Stanier design, and there were more of these built than any other Stanier locomotives, 852 of them altogether, from the 1930s through to the 1940s. Many of them built for service overseas during the war and by the other mainline railway companies as well.
Because you always think of Stania building only for LMS.
Well, this is an LMS design, but they were built by the other three principal railways during the war, because all the railways were effectively in public ownership then, even though they still flew their private colours.
That's a lucky lad on that.
Yes, he's having a great
I never
day.
understand why Stania didn't put pressure on them to straighten the line up on the west side of the country, and then his trains could have gone even faster.
Well, I don't think the mechanical engineers had as much influence as they'd like over the civil engineers. Perhaps that's what the cause was.
Well, they should have had, because he knew more about railways than they did. Ah, there she is. She is lovely, isn't she, Cole?
Yes, we had it repainted 2 or 3 years ago when it went on special exhibition in Japan, so she's been around.
Is she your favourite?
I daren't have favourites, but it's certainly one of the ones that I find most important exhibit, and very typical of the sort of thing that was happening here in the very early days of this famous works.
She's going to be a great attraction here at Crewe this summer.
It's been placed into a sort of pole position, or the place of honour in the Heritage Centre, where it will stay for visitors to see, safe and undercover.
A final word. Is the new Heritage Centre at Crewe going to be a success? Tony?
I think so. I've been walking around this morning, and what struck me is the local people are enjoying it so much. They're saying, oh yes, I recognise that, and Dad told me about that, and I remember Grandad telling me about that one. So for them, it's a great success, and a success for Crewe, I think.
David?
Well, echoing what Tony said, and it's also a great success for the people who put it together in something under 6 months. I think that's amazing. And the nice thing about it is that it's not just about engines and machines, it's about the people of this town. And railways were about people, no more than here. I don't see it can miss.
And lots of people will come, you know. They reckon there are 6 million railway enthusiasts in Britain, 60 million in Europe, 600 million in the world. So Crewe is not going to be short of visitors. And when they do come to Crewe this time, they'll know what to do.
On the 4th day of July I recollect well what bustle there was in the morning I'll tell, with the lads and young lassies so buxom and gay, delighted and talking about the railway. Travel by steam, so the folks say, all the world over upon the railway. So now, me good fellows, let us be all free, again fill the glass and now merry we be. Success to all trades in the reign of our Queen, and the boiling hot water that travels by steam. Travel by steam, so the folks say, all the world over upon the railway.
Please visit our website for news about new productions that are on the way, and you can support my work on my Patreon page. Thank you.